Hi and welcome to the African Cinema Podcast. I'm your host Tendai, and today we're traveling back to a time before Egypt was known as the Hollywood of the Arab world. This is before stars graced screens and cinema became central to national identity. We are going back to the beginning, the era between 1896 and 1936, where the moving image first flickered to life in Egypt. It's a story that weaves together colonialism, cosmopolitanism, resistance, and revolution. A story carried forward by visionaries like Mohamed Bayoumi and Aziz Amir. So settle in as we rediscover how cinema in Egypt began, not just as entertainment, but as a vehicle for storytelling, nationalism, and cultural self-definition. Cinema's global origin begins with the Lumière Brothers in Paris in December 1895. Showing short slices of life, basically workers leaving a factory, a train arriving at a station, and that moment marked the beginning of what we now call cinema. Less than a year later, on November 5th, 1896, Egypt joined the story. The first screening in the Middle East took place in Alexandria. Just 23 days after that, Cairo followed suit. So why Alexandria? Well, it was a cosmopolitan hub, home to Italians, Greeks, Armenians, French, British, and Egyptians alike. The city embodied a cultural openness that made it the perfect entry point for cinema in the region. In 1897, the Lumières sent Alexandre Promio, their trusted cameraman, to Egypt. His job? Documents the country. He shot 35 short films across Cairo and Alexandria, scenes of everyday life, landmarks, the Nile, and the people. They weren't narrative, but they were a beginning. For the first time, Egyptians were not just spectators, but subjects. At this point, film was purely observational. But the seed had been planted, and as the 20th century dawned, the idea that Egypt could make its own films, not just watch them, began to take hold. In 1906, something big happened. Two photographers, Aziz Badali, a Turk, and Aziz Dorés, an Italian, founded the Aziz and Dorés studio in Alexandria. It became the first dedicated film production company in the Middle East. Their first known film, made in 1907, documented a visit by Khedive Abbas Helmi II to the Morsi Abul Abbas Mosque. That same year, they opened Egypt's first purpose-built cinema hall, Cinema Forum Aziz and Dorés. Some historians argue this documentary should be considered the first Egyptian film. Others disagree, pointing out that it wasn't made by Egyptians. At this point, you can see that national identity, even in its early fluid form, was already a part of cinema discourse. By 1911, Egypt had 11 cinema halls. Within a decade, that number would grow to 50. Among the first major foreign companies to invest was France's Pathé Frères, which opened a theater in Cairo in 1908. European firms dominated early distribution, but not for long. To understand early Egyptian cinema, we need to understand the political mood. Egypt had been under British occupation since 1882. And by the early 20th century, nationalist movements were gaining momentum. The 1919 revolution marked a turning point. It ignited not only political activism, but also cultural awakening. There was a hunger for Egyptian self-representation, for Egyptian stories told by Egyptians. One of the earliest pioneers of that movement was Mohamed Bayoumi. Born in Tanta in 1894, Bayoumi's path to cinema was far from ordinary. He joined the military and became an artillery officer. But in 1919, after being punished for his involvement in the nationalist uprising, he pivoted toward art, journalism, and eventually film. That same year, he co-founded a theatrical troupe called Wadi al-Nil, or Valley of the Nile, alongside his friend Beshara Wakim. But Bayoumi wanted more. He wanted to master the cinematic medium. So he left for Europe. He trained in Italy and Austria, then worked as an assistant cinematographer in Berlin, where he made connections with German filmmakers like Wilhelm Carroll. His 1951 interview with Al Kawakeb magazine recounts how even Egyptian cigarettes helped him make friends in Berlin. And in 1921, he returned home. Back in Egypt, Bayoumi founded the country's first cinematic newsreel, Amon. He documented key national events, such as the return of Saad Zaghloul from exile, the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb, and Zaghl's funeral. But his greatest early achievement came in 1923, where he directed Basom Yabath and Wazifa, or Basom Looking for a Job. It starred Adel Hamid as Basom and Beshara Wakim as Sheikh Metwali. The 15-minute silent comedy was one of the first Egyptian narrative films made by Egyptians. It tackled the issue of unemployment among the young middle class. It was funny, yes, but also deeply political, intercutting actual footage from the 1919 revolution and highlighting Muslim-Christian solidarity. Bayoumi saw cinema as a vehicle for truth, resistance, and education. In 1925, Bayoumi filmed a documentary on the construction of the Banco Misr headquarters. That project led to a fateful meeting with Talat Harb, the nationalist economist and founder of Bank Misr. Bayoumi convinced Harb that cinema could be a national industry. The result was the creation of the Misr Acting and Cinema Company, a division of the Misr Advertising Company. And Bayoumi was appointed director. He and Harb traveled to Austria to buy modern cinema equipment, but when Bayoumi decided to stay behind for further training, tensions arose. Harb later excluded Bayoumi from the company's narrative. Feeling unrecognized, Bayoumi resigned. But he wasn't done. In 1932, he founded the Egyptian Cinematographic Institute in Alexandria, the country's first film school. While Bayoumi was breaking technical ground, another figure was making history in front of and behind the camera, Aziza Amir. A theater actress turned filmmaker, Amir wasn't content to just act. In 1927, she produced and starred in Layla, the first full-length narrative Egyptian film made by Egyptians. Though Turkish-Egyptian director Vedat Ofi began the project, disagreements led to Amir to fire him and bring in Stephen Rosti to complete it. Amir's production company, ISIS Film, wasn't just a business. It was a platform for national discourse. Layla dealt with themes of honor, social pressure, and women's vulnerability in traditional society. Amir was a pioneer, not just for women in cinema, but for Egyptian filmmakers overall. Following in her footsteps were other trailblazing women, Fatma Rushdie, Mary Queenie, and Asia Dagha, all of whom became influential producers and actresses in the decades that followed. By the 1930s, cinema in Egypt was becoming a mirror. Not just a mirror of European style, but of Egyptian life, tensions, and aspirations. Take Mohamed Karim's Zainab, which was released in 1930. It was based on a novel by Mohammed Hussein Hekal, and it told a tragic rural love story, an allegory for social restriction and gender oppression. Karim, who had studied in Italy and Germany, gave Egypt its first realist drama. He shot in natural locale, portraying village life as both pretty and stifling. Meanwhile, musical melodramas like Al-Wahad Al-Bahad, The White Rose, released in 1935, became immensely popular. Directed by Karim and starring the iconic singer Mohammed Abdel Wahab, it introduced what would become a staple formula: rich girl, poor boy, love denied. At this point, Egyptian cinema was starting to establish genres, and audiences were eating it up. One striking feature of early Egyptian cinema is how cosmopolitan it was. The Italian Alfisio Fanelli, the Hungarian Stefani Rosti, the Chilean-Palestinian Lama brothers, and the Jewish-Egyptian Togo Misra were among those who built the industry's early backbone. This diversity didn't dilute Egyptian identity, it expanded it. Together, these filmmakers helped shape a cinema that was at once local and international. drawing on Arabic theater, European drama, and Hollywood fantasy. By the 1930s, major studios were forming. Studio Misr opened in 1935 with state-of-the-art equipment. It was Egypt's answer to Hollywood, vertically integrated, stylish, and ambitious. It launched careers, trained talent, and elevated Egyptian cinema into a regional powerhouse. So, what do we make of these first 4 decades of Egyptian cinema? They were experimental, political, dreamy, and often contradictory, and yet deeply foundational. Figures like Mohamed Bayoumi and Aziz Amir weren't just making films, they were creating an art form, an industry, and a national voice. Cinema in Egypt began as an import, but by 1936 it had become something else entirely: a national mirror, a cultural battleground, and an artistic force. And in the next episode, we'll step into the golden age, where studios flourish, stars are born, and Egyptian films sweep across the Arab world. Thanks for listening to the African Cinema Podcast. Until next time, ciao.